That report comes out today. The government commissioned it some time ago. A whole lot of projects now have been scrapped. This is a $120 billion capital works pipeline. I know communities, particularly in Queensland and in Victoria, have been waiting many, many years for these projects to come to fruition. They're gone today. She wants to try and blame the former government, saying that they were unfunded, these projects were unfunded. But I mean, I tell you, I remember when the Abbott government got in 2013, all the promises about the NDIS, it wasn't funded outside the forward estimates. Nothing really is. And of course, you've got more and more migrants coming in and we need more and more infrastructure. There's a lot of very angry Australians today that are losing their roads that were promised and all the other things. Bridget, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Peter, you're dead right. I mean, and you know better than anyone the important work that we did in government to actually smoothing that boom-bust infrastructure investment pipeline out so that communities, state governments and contractors actually had certainty over a long period of time. And you've heard it from Labor treasurers and infrastructure ministers to local councillors and community groups, the level of outrage that 50 projects have just been slashed, and that's from Faster Rail to Geelong in my home state, to a whole raft of projects. The M7, M12 links in Sydney, which was really to connect Sydney to Western Sydney Airport. These projects have been cut, and what I think is more concerning is there's 250 projects that have been thrown into uncertainty. We don't know whether they're going to be cut or delayed. And so there's still this great level of uncertainty, which means contractors are going to be sweating that equipment. They're actually going to be stressing about the workforce that they've got on, and communities are not getting the infrastructure they need whilst Labor's bringing in 1.5 million additional people. It just beggars belief. And you're right, Catherine King's trying to blame the former coalition government. They're also sucker punched the state Labor governments by making them ultimately responsible for the tough decisions. And you know, when we're in government, you do have to make the tough decisions about spending priorities. And this government has chose to invest in $328 billion of energy infrastructure in the next 8 years instead of critical road and rail infrastructure in our congested suburbs and regions.
I have to say, if you're an Australian who lives in a regional community, I think you're really hard done by tonight, because we know the Prime Minister exempted that absolute white elephant, Victoria's $200 billion suburban rail loop, from any scrutiny, but they scrapped this, the fast rail project from Geelong, big growth corridor from Geelong and Melbourne. Now that makes sense. Suburban rail doesn't make sense, but you know when they won't even look at it, that it's a dog.
That's right.
It's a bad policy.
Absolutely.
But they wouldn't even look at it.
Absolutely. So what was ruled out of the review? The suburban rail loop. We heard from the minister this week they're going to have to end up putting in an additional $9 billion on top of the $2 they've already put in. They've exempted the stadiums. Remember the sweetheart deals with both Tasmania and Queensland state governments to get them across the line in other policy areas. The stadiums were exempt from the review, as were all the election promises from Labor. So it was really only those critical projects that communities had fought so hard for so long to be delivered. Things like, you know, the Frankston-Baxter rail link. I mean, you can't get an any more growing region than sort of Melbourne to Geelong and therefore Melbourne to Baxter, and that's been cancelled as well. In Penrith, Mulgoa Road upgrade. We've got these 1.5 million new arrivals flooding into Western Sydney, and you're actually cutting the connectivity infrastructure to make it livable. So it just doesn't make sense. But you're right, the regions are incredibly hard done by with that change in funding arrangement. Essentially, we've got a 30% cut to funding to the regions. And if you've driven on a road outside a capital city these days,
I have,
right across the country, you know we need the investment out there.
I hit a pothole on the Ballarat Highway just outside of Creswick, took my car out of action for over a week. Hey, just quickly, the Nats went out today calling for an ACCC inquiry into meat pricing. Why is that?
Well, because we know that the price of sheep has fallen through the floor thanks to, in part, the Labor government's decision to end the live sheep export trade. I've been hearing from sheep farmers that had to truck 600 head to the sale yard for $7 a head. No takers, truck them home. $14 a head. It's cheaper actually to be shooting sheep in the paddock at the moment than putting them on the truck to the sale yard. And the ACCC has actual powers to investigate while that decrease in cost isn't being passed through at the checkout. So someone's making a mozza, and the ACCC is just the body to actually investigate who, but they need direction from Jim Chalmers. So this team talks a big game on cost of living. They've got a plan. I tell you, Jim, one thing you could do tomorrow is get your pen out, direct the ACCC to actually investigate this and make sure that the cost cutting that's going on in the supply chain is actually passed on to the checkout.
To the consumers, particularly coming into Christmas. Bridget McKenzie, thank you.